G'day and welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you. Our guest today is Alex Scheer, CEO and founder of zkMe, the zk identity layer, enabling secure, self-sovereign and private credential verification. What does that mean? Well, zkMe is most known for its decentralized zk KYC or Know Your Customer solution, which users stay anonymous while allowing dApp developers to stay compliant. Big deal. It is a big deal. I'm not saying that facetiously. We're really excited to have Alex on the show to discuss how zk Tech solves so many of the onboarding challenges in Web3. And with 650,000 KYC'd and sybil-protected user credentials attested so far, zkMe is building the identity infrastructure for mass adoption. Let's dive in. How did you get started, particularly in Web3?
It's a super interesting story. Before I started in Web3, I was working in automotive, and I was running the small boutique software logistics company out of Berlin. And in one very cold afternoon in autumn, one of my employees came to me. He's a little bit of a special character. He came to me and said, Alex, there's this new crazy thing called Ethereum, and it's going to revolutionize the world. He had a lot of interesting ideas, and somehow that led me down a rabbit hole. So end of 2016, start of 2017.
Oh, so early Ethereum,
yeah, quite early. Yeah. As one of those first ones to get to hear of it in Berlin, bought some tokens, got into DeFi in 2017, been trading ever since. But somehow was never really brave enough to leave my cushiony job. So it took 4 years of DeFi trading and a global lockdown to finally convince me that I want to do something full time in the industry. And then after COVID, I just decided, you know what, there are some things happening that might go against the ethos of Web3. Some regulatory changes, and I want to build a solution that helps DeFi stay DeFi, stay private while potentially fulfilling global compliance requirements. So that's when I got started with zkMe.
All right. Other than just your friend from work saying, "Hey, you got to check this out," what was interesting to you about Web3 or crypto back then, or Ethereum? What was the thing that someone not going to open the door for you, but what was the thing that kept you going?
The very first idea of just having a trustless system of information exchange, having a single point of truth sounded so incredible to me. At that time, again, mathematical background, logistics background, handled a lot of supply chains. And as you know, the first use cases in crypto were actually, or in blockchain, were mostly logistics focused.
Yeah.
It seemed such a revolutionary tech that I just had to get involved. And then after that, that was the first promise, the promise of true information symmetry, to enable a global network of companies, of entities, of individuals all working together on the same, source of truth. That was the first thing that really captivated me. And then the second one was just the promise of DeFi, the promise of having truly accessible financial services for everyone, and just the incredible financial and capital efficiency that you can reach in DeFi. And yeah, it's been a story that has captivated me since those days.
Yeah, man. What are some of the things that are so you're interested in it? You see some potential in it. Having been around, so there's a couple of cohorts, right? So there's the super OGs, 2008, 2009, another kind of cohort, 2012, another cohort seemed to come through 2014. The 2015, 16, very early Ethereum crew, and then into 2017, obviously saw a massive influx of people. 2020 and 2021, kind of DeFi summer, NFTs saw another cohort of people come in. You've seen obviously a lot happen over the last 8 or so years. You've been around blockchain and Web3. What were some of the kind of the early pain points. So obviously you see a potentially revolutionary technology, great economy for trustlessness and things like this. What are some of the early kind of pain points, especially in DeFi, that you identified, or maybe they were commonly identified back in the earlier days?
Yeah, I have to be careful which anecdotes to mention. Like, there's a couple of really painful ones, but as you might have experienced yourself. Like, one of the first really forming moments was starting to trying to use early wallets, and the user experience that was connected to that, especially in maybe the non-EVM chains. Mm-hmm. Like early Polkadot, for example, was really a pain to use. Some Cosmos-based protocols had really big user experience issues. So those, I think, were the most forming experiences, and also one of the guiding principles for zkMe. Like, we want to build the most lean user experience because it's the most important criteria for mass adoption, in my opinion.
Yeah, gotcha. I mean, yeah. The kind of, I think since 2017, kind of the proverbial question is, can you grandma use it, or can you onboard your grandma?
Yes.
And like you said, man, those early wallets were difficult for people in the tech industry to navigate and to try to figure out. A great cost to some people, even friends of mine back in the day, who either lost access to or had things ripped off from them, or all those kinds of things. And so, in what kind of way you're talking about zkMe? In what kinds of ways did your early experience, or even just the gaps in where the technology or the utilization of the technology is? How's that affecting how you approach zkMe?
Very good question. And like the first thing that comes in mind is besides user experience, is that we want to be as chain agnostic as possible. Like, even though zkMe is a protocol, it acts more as an oracle. So you have one identity, and we can get into what we do exactly in a moment. Yeah. But it's this idea that you have a single point of truth again, that is anchored on a chain, but can be used on all kinds of chains. Like, we see ourselves as a service provider that solves some of those usability issues within protocols on other chains. So, for example, if you're an active DeFi trader on Solana, but you want to use the same kind of identity also on another chain, let's say Arbitrum, you have only one identity wallet within zkMe that feeds both chains. So usability for sure is number one. Then another lessons learned, having been a victim of several scams and several hacks, I think just risk management is super important as well. I know so many projects that just put everything on a single point of failure. We try to avoid that. And we also have made a very, very conscious decision of separating the ownership of an identity with the ownership of an asset. So even if your asset wallet, let's say the wallet that holds all of your Bitcoin, gets hacked, then at least your identity is not compromised. Or the other way around, let's say your identity is compromised, and at least you're not losing all of the assets that are somehow interacting with that identity.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I mean, I think it's probably a good time to rewind and talk about what is it that you're building? Why are you building this, and maybe even why now? And I remember talking to some people on my team maybe 3 or 4 months ago and saying, how come this doesn't exist? And one of them says, it does exist. And here it is, and here you are. So for the sake of our listeners, what's kind of the 30-second elevator pitch? And then we'll delve into some of the details and nuance of that.
I mean, the easiest way to explain it is we just bring KYC AML compliance to chain in a Web3 native way. I know that there's a lot of stigma against doing KYC on chain, and yes, there's an argument that chains were built with the explicit intent of not having to rely on counterparties. But the reality is that for a whole list of different reasons, we need to be able to know who we're engaging with on chain. And we need to do it in a way that doesn't go against the ethos of Web3. So we are building an infrastructure and a protocol that allows you to verify your counterparty on chain without having to process, nor store, nor somehow access any private information of your counterparty. So that's where the ZK comes in. We leverage client-side zero-knowledge proofs in order to anonymize the data right at the point of collection. So every single entity self-verifies. So for example, you would be able to verify, I'm over 18. I'm not telling you when I was born exactly, but I can prove to you mathematically that I'm over 18. And that then can be used, for example, as a whitelisting criteria to allow you to join a game, for example, like easiest example.
Gotcha. So the ZK part, zero knowledge, is kind of foundational to, that's in the name,
yes.
zkMe. Can you help us understand how can you prove something like that with zero knowledge? Something has to be stored somewhere to be able to have some sort of trust in the system. I'm just thinking about, because you talk about KYC and like you mentioned, there's in certain corners of the Web3 ecosystem, there's a lot of suspicion about that. And as you said, philosophically, people are against KYC thing. And man, the whole idea is that I can act and trade in a way that is trustless, in a way that I can be anonymous. But obviously there are some instances where you must be known, you must be able to prove certain things, which is, I guess, why you said before, you work like an oracle. How does zero knowledge work in this capacity? How can I prove something without saying the thing?
Yeah, that goes a little bit into what a zero knowledge proof itself is, right? Like how is a layer 2 able to prove that transactions were processed without disclosing the transaction themselves to Ethereum? It's exactly the same question. So the way I typically explain zero knowledge proofs to, let's say like the typical 15-year-old, like someone that has a little bit of an understanding of maybe how computers work, is that it's like a zero knowledge proof is a way to prove that a calculation was done as intended. So I can prove to you with a zero knowledge proof that I calculated A plus B equals 2 without telling you what A and B were. So let's say A and B were integers, so it could have been like 0 plus 2, 2 plus 0, or 1 plus 1. You would never be able to know, but you know that the calculation was done as intended. So what we did is we took the typical KYC, like the programmatic part of KYC, the thing that typically is done on a centralized server, like for example by a bank or by a human looking at your passport, and just pushed it to the device of the user. So verification is taking place on your phone if you are a zkMe user, that then generates a zero knowledge proof of that calculation. So actually what we are trading and what we are disclosing to chain is just an abstract proof that data collection took place. And then the second secret sauce is that not only do we anonymize that information, we then also, in order to fulfill a legal requirement, encrypt that information through a multi-signature, through like a threshold encryption, to make sure that the original information that led to someone being KYC'd stays forever encrypted until like there is sufficient legal reason to recover the identity of the user. So that's why like our users stay verifiably anonymous until proven guilty. So we turn, the whole burden of proof around. Like at the moment, if you go to a financial service, you open a bank account, the regulator can, for any and all reasons, collect any information about you. And I have some funny anecdotes on that if you want to hear them later.
Of course.
But in our solution, like the regulator would have to prove like plausible reasons for the recovery that needs to convince like a quorum of people. It's like a multi-signature. At least 3 different stakeholders need to be convinced that sufficient burden of proof is provided to dox the user. And maybe one additional thing, because I fully agree, right? Like in Web3, there should always be like a spectrum of anonymity. There should be use cases in which a user is fully anonymous. That's the whole reason we're pushing for decentralization and for trustless systems that are fully permissionless, where anyone can play. But if we want to have true mass adoption, and we want to bank the bankless, and we want to replace existing inefficient financial services, then we will have to provide some form of compliance with existing regulations. Like, we will not be able to just get rid of 200 years of regulation, but we will be able to somehow reinterpret those regulations in a Web3 native way.
Yeah, I must say, like, even speaking personally, I've come around, I think, on KYC over the last 6 or 7 years, 7 or 8 years. In particular, exactly as you say, we need to have some use cases where we can be anonymous, and then there are others where if you want to interact with the rest of the world, or Web 2 or regulated industries, then we have to we've got to meet in the middle somewhere. And so to be able to have a KYC, be able to prove that I am who I say I am, or that I'm over 18, or meet certain criteria, geographic residence or whatever, without actually giving away any of those things, for me tends to it's not quite the best of both worlds, but it's a great compromise in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we have lost in this whole discussion is that it's actually a trust building mechanism, right? Like, if we are able to have the trust without the potential for data being leaked, then we do have the best of both worlds. So besides, individual KYC, I think one of the things that most people are not thinking about is the KYB, or the verification of entities that are acting on chain. I'm actually dreaming of a world where every single smart contract is somehow graded by the trust that is behind the entity that created that smart contract. So with a solution like zkMe, you could, for example, say, the DeFi protocol that developed the following swap protocol is actually really trusted. They have been around for a long time. Like, all of the founders and all of the developers are unknown. All of them have been checked, even though I don't disclose who they are, but at least someone did the background check. And then you could have other smart contracts that are fully unknown. And if you have the full information, insight into who is who, you can make an informed decision as an actor on chain, whether you want to trust a certain smart contract or you don't want to trust another smart contract.
Yeah, I remember at the height of the ICO craze, people were anonymous teams would push out things, but there'd be some sort of KYB, but only with some other influencer who had said, yes, I've face to face this person in real life, and it's just another layer of trust me, bro. And inevitably, so many of those ended up going terribly. And so, in an increasingly, it was already regulated, but perhaps the regulations are now applying more forcefully into the Web3 landscape. I think something like that kind of KYB, where you can be at least pseudonymous, and yet there's some sort of proof of, more than just trust me, bro, or getting an influencer to vouch for you. Those kinds of mechanisms, yeah, I think are incredibly important. How are you dealing with the different kinds of regulations in different jurisdictions around the world? Are you just going for the most stringent compliance and applying that globally, or are there bespoke approaches for different jurisdictions? How are you thinking through all that kind of stuff?
Super good question, and one that doesn't get asked sufficiently. We take the opposite approach. We take a bottom-up approach where we say there is already an international standard provided by like a global institution called the FATF. The FATF recommends like minimum data collections, and we make sure that we fulfill those. And pretty much all countries around the world have those FATF requirements as like the entry level due diligence. And since most crypto companies see themselves as globally operating entities either way, we believe that's at least like a first step that every single company should take. And then beyond that, I see it a little bit as like a Lego set, right? Like if you know you're especially active in the United States and you have a high risk product, then I mean by any means add additional verifications. Like it's not a black and white, and zkMe provides like a series of different credentials, and you as a protocol can decide how many of those credentials do you really apply as part of your due diligence process.
And are you finding that crypto projects and companies and users are coming around on KYC? I mean, historically it's been very far down the priority list for Web3 projects, apart from maybe if they're doing some fundraising, but otherwise, they're trying to get, I want to be careful how I say that. I don't mean they're trying to get around it. They try to mitigate how much they can do it while still doing it legally. Let's put it that way. But are you finding people are coming around to the kind of previous challenges of KYC, or is it becoming better? Is something like a zkMe actually making it more more simple to actually say, oh yeah, okay, well let's do it, and we can still do it within the principles of decentralization and anonymity?
I'm currently seeing a shift in the market for sure. Like we see bigger projects starting to at least very openly think about implementing due diligence. I mean, one thing that probably most people don't know, but crypto is already the number one industry among all industries with the biggest AML fines and the most prison sentences given because of AML or AML violations. So we do see projects turning around, even though we know that we're still very much ahead of the curve. It's my very true belief that projects like zkMe help with a shift in narrative. And once we've done enough like educational work, explaining to users, to projects that actually like no private data is ever disclosed, and if we really have nothing to hide, this is the way to go. We will reach a certain point in which like the dam will just break, and most projects will implement the solution, because it's like something that is really easy to implement and adds a lot of trust. Like independent of what the regulator says, it's just objectively more secure if you know as a project who your users are. You have potentially something to recover in case a user behaves badly, or as a user, every single company that you're interacting with. As you said, best of both worlds, and sooner or later, the industry will recognize that.
Yeah, especially if there's an increasing threat of AML violations leading to jail time and fines. Surely that's a huge motivating factor for companies in particular to actually know who their customer is. But I didn't realize that it had been, like, obviously it's a consideration, but I didn't realize that was such a big deal.
Yeah, especially last year, like 2022, AML fines were almost nothing, like under 100 million for the whole industry worldwide. And then in 2023, for whatever reason, like the total amount of fines shot up like over 19,000%, like from almost nothing to like the biggest fines in the industry. I mean, to be honest, like a big portion of that was Binance, but the whole industry as a whole is now for sure under scrutiny from the regulator.
Yeah, right. So regulations are something that's forcing this to a head, or at least the enforcement of those regulations is something that's kind of putting this higher on the project's priority list, perhaps you'd say. You mentioned there's this kind of global minimum standard in the regulatory space. Is there any sense of a standard in the Web3 space when it comes to KYC or AML? Is there anything where you say, well, everybody does this and we also do that, or we think about it this way, or is that not a thing yet?
It's an interesting question. I think the de facto standard at the moment is to do IP address blocking, like as a bare minimum of just saying, like, there are certain jurisdictions that I want to avoid, even though I don't have a reliable proof that I avoided those legislations, jurisdictions, then at least I try my best by IP address blocking. So that's the de facto standard at the moment.
Yeah.
Most regulators do not accept IP address blocking, like especially the United States. There's a lot of case law against IP address blocking. So what I see as the emergent standard is actually doing some form of jurisdiction avoidance by using something that goes beyond IP address. So for example, like one of the things that we offer as like an entry-level due diligence process is accessing the GPS location of the phone of the user and then anonymizing it to a country level. So we have a proof that says, like, yeah, during the time that the user onboarded onto your service, he was physically located in that jurisdiction. So that gives you like one additional level beyond IP and maybe before KYC, so like an intermediate getting started.
Any other kinds of things like that? I mean, that's amazing. One of the things that I thought was, it was interesting to learn when I first learned it was, even when you use like a VPN or something like this from another jurisdiction, another time zone, the sites that you visit or apps that you use can still see your clock time, so the operating system time, and they can say, oh, well, they're obviously at least in this time zone, if not accessing GPS and other kinds of data. Are there other kinds of ways to know where somebody is or isn't?
There's a whole lot of different things you could do. I mean, starting from like technical things that you just mentioned, you could potentially access like email numbers or like other numbers that identify the device that you're using. You could, like a lot of crypto users actually using crypto via mobile, access things like which kind of mobile network is the user using. Like there's a lot of things potentially you could do, but it depends a little bit what do you want to achieve, right? Like in most cases, at least that's my presumption, the DeFi protocol, just like any Web3 protocol, is more interested in doing internal risk management and providing like additional service to the user rather than doxing the user. So I think something more valuable would be to implement like a collection of different things. And in my opinion, it should always be risk-based. Like we do not want to suddenly increase like the onboarding frictions for retail users in DeFi and say like every single DeFi protocol must be like fully KYC'd from day one. But maybe you have like a tiered approach where like entry level, every trade that is lifetime under $50 is completely anonymous. And then if you do over, like you suddenly get like low to medium risk, I ask you to anonymously share your GPS location. And then if you go, let's say over $10,000, then I need like an anonymous proof that you did provide your KYC data. So that's how I think of the future of DeFi, like a tiered approach that is risk-based.
In what sense, like back to my other question before about the standards, is there any way to, so the things that you're talking about now, I'm thinking this sounds like a really good way forward. How do we codify that as Web3 users and producers and investors, etc.? Is that a thing worthwhile doing, or is it just a factor of you have really good companies doing really good things, and they will end up dominating the space, and that will become the standard because they just happen to be the best.
I'm not sure. Like in the industry at the moment, we do see many different approaches being implemented. There are whole chain ecosystems that are like KYC'd by definition. Like you can only participate in those chains if both as a protocol developer or as a retail user you have KYC'd. And all of that ends up in like a centralized KYC database. To be honest, I personally don't really believe in those approaches. Like I believe in like an evolution rather than a revolution.
Sure.
In which it's always going to be need-based. So as you mentioned previously, it's not going to be like day one, like day zero, nothing, and then day one, everything gated, but more like step by step. You'll have some of the big players receiving subpoenas from regulators all around the world. Their mindset will change. Some of them will implement one set of solutions, one will implement another set of solutions, and then that's how it will trickle down, and more projects will coalesce around like one approach. Okay. But it'll take several years. Like I'm not expecting this to happen anytime soon.
Right. And one of the things, like one of the reasons that I ask that is because I see it as something necessary for real adoption of blockchain, cryptocurrency, Web3, DeFi. It's one thing to build something which you can onboard people into, but to be able to go into the markets, if you like, I think we have to, again, meet them halfway or sync up in some capacity to de-risk. People might have seen, billions of dollars worth of fines being levied over the last year, and think we don't want any part of that risk. We can't have any kind of vectors of attack or exposure to this kind of thing. Whereas for me, something like even just as simple as sorting out KYC and AML would actually kind of, hopefully at least, assuage some of those fears amongst existing players who might really want to come and play in the crypto space and the Web3 space. But those kinds of barriers are just too risky for them to, jump in on. One of the things that, from a user perspective, one of the reasons that people don't like KYC, at least, if you survey the typical crypto user, is just because of privacy concerns. In what kind of way is zkMe creating decentralized and anonymous cross-chain credential verifications without centralized data storage? How are you thinking of, how do you actually, how can you calm the fears of people who might go, man, I don't want to, the whole reason I'm in crypto is I don't want to give my data. And now there's protocols that require me to. How can I be assured that I'm not just giving up on my data?
I mean, it's a really justified fear, right? Like one of the original triggers for me to work in this industry was me finding my passport picture in a forum and knowing exactly which centralized exchange must have leaked it. So like KYC data hacks happen constantly. Just recently we had Fractal ID being hacked. We had several big centralized exchanges being hacked. We had several Web2 KYC data hacks. Like hacks happen all the time. So what we do, and I think that's probably the biggest trust building mechanism that we implemented, is encryption that is on a case-by-case study, case-by-case. It's done case-by-case. So every single individual's KYC data is pseudonymized and encrypted upon collection. So before it leaves the device of the user, it is already pseudonymized and encrypted, and then stored in a decentralized storage by the user themselves. So it's like a self-sovereign storage solution in which the user owns and controls their own data and only trades in abstract proofs that this data exists and that this data is potentially recoverable. This eliminates all of the honeypots that are so like easy targets for hackers. In a worst case scenario,
targets too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the bigger the target, right? The higher the incentive for a hacker to go for it. In our case, even if a malicious actor goes against or goes for these data sets, they would have to attack every single user's data like independently or singly. So it just exponentially increases the effort needed to access all of those data sets.
So what you're saying is there's nothing really centralized to hack. Someone's not going to come across or stumble across your KYC data by hacking into an exchange that you've used. That have to specifically come after you personally to somehow get your data. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, correct. I mean, as long as the data collection algorithm, like the one that we use in order to collect the data, is trusted, all of the other steps afterwards are completely decentralized and trustless. And then step by step, we'll work to remove every single trust assumption that exists within the process and make it open source, so that the trust assumption isn't in us or what an auditor says, but can be verified by every single participant.
So why isn't everybody doing this? What are the downsides or drawbacks? I don't want to sound like an ad. I'm just. It seems to me that it's a no-brainer at this stage with the current technology that we have to do it like this.
I mean, I think there's 2 or 3 different reasons, and there's in my opinion, there's a significant moat. There is a financial moat, like the centralized KYC market is very much dominated by a handful of players, right. And it's a very well established and very centralized market. Like it's really, really difficult for a new KYC provider to enter the KYC market, like the so-called eKYC market. That's one thing that is for sure like keeping a lot of projects from innovating in that space. Then there's just the obvious fact that zero knowledge proofs have just recently become efficient enough to make something like this possible. Like I remember in uni many years ago, stumbling across zero knowledge proofs for the first time, and at that time it was like ludicrous to think you could take like a program or like even a part of a program and encapsulate it into a zero knowledge proof. Mm-hmm. It's been all of the progress made, especially for layer 2s innovating on the zero knowledge proof front, that have finally made it possible for like a B2B service application like ours to really leverage zero knowledge proofs.
Yeah, gotcha. What do you think is other than what you are building, what's the future of ZK proofs, or even on the horizon? Not necessarily, like you say, You go back to uni and you think, oh, this is interesting, theoretical and possible, but not yet. Not necessarily that for today, the theoretical and possible, but not yet. But what's kind of on the horizon? What are you expecting in this realm in the next, say, 2 years?
I love this question because actually, my heart is really in the potential use cases that an infrastructure like ours could provide. Mm-hmm. Like that's why if you go to our website zk.me, we actually say like we develop protocol and infrastructure for identity information, and the only reason we've started with a focus on on-chain compliance is in order to prove that the infrastructure can be used. Like my like long-term future vision is actually that I'm building an infrastructure that can be used for all kinds of information exchanges that run in parallel with an asset transaction on another chain. So again, things like healthcare data, for example, insurance data, logistics data, manufacturing data, like all of these things that are currently processed by really, really inefficient systems that include a lot of intermediaries, in the future will run on two chains, like an information chain that has more block space to store like really big information, and then an asset chain to transfer the value. And zkMe will be that information layer that runs in parallel with the asset layer.
All right. So you talked about, say, infrastructure or health data, supply chain, that kind of stuff. What is kind of the killer app version of, say, health data? How does this apply there?
Health is actually going to be our second vertical, and we're already actively working on that. Just to give you one idea. So healthcare is currently extremely fragmented. Like the experience that you have as like both from the business side, but also from the patient side, is that you need to personally know who you're engaging with. And one of the use cases that we're currently working on the monetization of preventive care is that users will own their own medical data on our chain, and then have the ability to selectively disclose that data to their doctor. And then on the other side, insurance companies and doctors will have a platform on which to monetize that preventive care. So, for example, if someone scans their, like as a super light skinned person, I scan my moles for skin cancer, and then if I have the ability to generate some form of proof that I did this and that maybe one of the moles has been identified as potentially skin cancer, then I could within my chain find like a provider that is able to have a look at it and give me like a quote on handling that situation. So there is a lot of inefficiencies in data, is I think the core message that we could revolutionize by making a really lean way of transferring data between stakeholders.
Yeah, gotcha. And even potentially, if you're talking about in a zero knowledge kind of way, if people wanted to use 1 million people's moles, for example, but without being able to trace back that mole to you or to me, I also have very light skin and I also have to have things cut out pretty regularly. But for research purposes, let alone for treatment purposes, there must be some, great applications there as well, surely.
Yeah, like that's. I mean, you're really good at asking questions, because like another use case that we're working on is actually in regards to genome data. Especially for our like US listeners, you might have heard of the scandal surrounding 23andMe, where 23andMe was actually making most of its money by selling genome data that contains a lot of private information.
Oh yes.
Yeah, but there's a lot of value in that, right? Like, there's a lot of researchers around the world. There's a lot of like healthcare companies, a lot of researchers that might not be interested in the private part of the genome, like the exact sequence of genes that you have connected with your name, but maybe on the statistical distribution of certain genome traits. So if you have something like a zero knowledge proof, you could, for example, encode the availability of a certain genome trait without disclosing either the identity of the genome holder, like the patient, or the entire genome itself. So the only thing that would be tradable on our chain would be like an abstract representation, like let's say 20% of patients have blue eyes, or have this genome sequence, or have this genetic defect. So you create this completely new data economy that does not rely on the exploitation of private data.
Man, that's huge. There's obviously some massive applications there as well. And as you kind of go through each of those verticals you mentioned before, holy moly, man, you've got many probably years ahead of you in terms of kind of fleshing out the various kinds of applications. That's just the things that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, let alone there's going to be some like Really amazing nuanced applications in there as well.
Absolutely. Like if just thinking about that, most of the big tech giants make their money by being data brokers, right? Like most of Google's revenue comes from AdSense and from profiling you as an internet user.
Oh yeah,
that's all economic value that is currently not like is super centralized in one monopoly. And if you have a system in which the data holder themselves could own that data and then choose how to monetize that data, I personally believe there's like an enormous economic value that we cannot even grasp at the moment. Yeah, but I like one step after another done. Like I know how difficult it is to build an infrastructure such as this. That's why we're laser focused on on-chain compliance first.
Yeah.
And then once we've proven that, we'll expand into other verticals.
And man, I think you'll need to prove it at that level before people will say, yeah, sure, have my genome. Exactly. Even if it's stored locally or if it's stored in a decentralized way but encrypted, on the device before it goes anywhere. To prove this in one vertical, obviously, I think is going to be imperative before you go into those even more sensitive. I mean, money is pretty sensitive and pretty closely guarded by most people, but maybe less so than their private health data. So yeah, I totally get that. But man, data is gold even at the moment, like you mentioned, from most of the big tech players. It's already gold, and trying to democratize data so that my data is owned by me and I get to kind of monetize that or benefit from that, or even just like I would love to do a 23andMe, never have, precisely for the reasons that have now come to light. What do you think about? Man, we running out of time, but I'm really keen to hear your opinion about MiCA and more recent regulatory developments, and where do you see those going over the next, say, even 6 months to 2 years? I think is Web3 going to get squeezed more? Do you think we've kind of found a nice stasis for now? It's going to be complicated with other jurisdictions jumping in and doing things. How are we going to make Web3 and the decentralized future happen in an increasingly regulated environment?
At the moment, I think we're on a very steady state. Like I don't think as much as me personally for my own company would wish differently. I don't think the 1st of January is going to completely change the way crypto works. But it's going to be a gradual increase in pressure from regulators all around the world. Crypto and Web3 and DeFi, for the vast majority of regulators, is currently too small to really, put the big thumb on and to really enforce a lot of existing regulation. So if you were to ask me, what is the future of regulation on chain, I see 2 different paths. And that's also what most regulators tell me, is either a path in which the industry is with increased maturity and with increased institutional interest and with increased adoption on a path towards self-regulation, where we say, it's sensible for us to implement certain risk management tools, and then the regulator's happy with that, and it just keeps growing into that direction. Or there is a future in which, especially should, another FTX happen, another Luna happen, the regulator has to expedite the enforcement of certain legislations on chain. So I hope for the industry that it's the first, that we, step by step mature as an industry, rather than having things, put as burden onto the industry that might not be compatible with the ethos of Web3. That's my biggest worry. My biggest worry is that one day the regulators wake up and say, okay, It was nice as long as it lasted, but now every single transaction has to be permissioned by one centralized entity. That's the future to avoid. I think you're on mute.
Oh, really?
At least.
Do you have any particularly contrarian views? That could be in crypto or out in the world. Are there any way that you are swimming where everyone seems to be swimming the other direction, or anything that you think that everybody thinks is right that you think is not right, or vice versa?
I mean, it's the whole topic, right? Like, I think if you were to ask 100 people in this industry regarding the involvement of the legislative branches and the regulators in crypto is a net negative. In my opinion, it's a very strong net positive. Like, the only way to get like the billions of dollars onto DeFi and billions of users onto DeFi is going to be a green light from a regulator. So in my opinion, and that's my contrarian view, we as an industry should be much more embracing of regulators getting educated what DeFi is, getting educated on what the potential benefits are, and actually actively participating in shaping sensible regulation. It should be a net positive.
Who's doing that really well, do you think? Is there anybody that's kind of with you on that, but actually also doing it? Not just philosophically aligned, but like implementing it?
I think there are several groups out there that are currently like really actively looking into educating the regulators. There's one that I really want to highlight, which is the Crypto Council for Innovation. They do a fantastic job in really actively reaching out to regulators all around the world. They have a global scope. I've met with them in Japan, talking to Japanese regulators. I've met with them here in Hong Kong. They have been active in Taiwan, in United States. So really global reach for a global industry. So kudos to the Crypto Council for Innovation.
Yeah. Last thing for today is for a project or a user who is still not fully convinced, but having heard you today has thought, you know what, this guy makes some good points. I need to find out more about this. Where would you direct them to find out more, to kind of get them over the line? And then secondly, once over the line, what should they do about it?
I mean, for all of the project developers out there, just go to zk.me, probably one of the easiest domains in crypto, to learn more and potentially get involved. And for all the users, if you want to, learn about the user experience, go to app.zk.me. We're also starting to really reward our users in participating like in different DeFi campaigns. So go to app.zk.me, verify yourself anonymously, start staking anonymously, start trading anonymously, and then I think over time you'll know of the value of being compliant while anonymous.
Sounds good, man. If someone wants to find out more or hear more from you and follow the journey and some of the things that we've spoken about today as they kind of materialize, how can they hear more from you?
From me specifically, I try to be a little bit behind the scenes, but I think the biggest the biggest channel is obviously our X presence. So it's at zkMe_, and that's where we'll just keep everyone informed of our progress. I'm also appearing from time to time in AMAs, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with us.
Sounds great. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate you coming on the show. And man, all the best for what's coming up. Sounds like a massive undertaking, but with all, what you've already accomplished, I think you're well on the way. So good on you, man. Keep going, and thanks again.
Thank you so much for having us, and looking forward to join again next time.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And maybe, the 1 million user milestone or the first healthcare verticals active on zkMe might be a good milestone to celebrate with this podcast.
Party for you.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Don.
Thanks for joining us again today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Off-Chain Podcast. We love bringing you great guests like Alex and hope we've inspired you to learn more about Web3, about technology, about the future, about KYC even, and regulations. And as always, like, subscribe, or better yet, share this episode with a friend. Help us spread the word and join us again next week for another exciting episode of the Off-Chain Podcast. Till then, take care.